Okay, so you want to own a theme park. You picture it. The gates swing open at 9 and a river of people pours through. Strollers, mouse ears, kids sprinting for the first coaster, caramel corn in the air, a castle at the end of a long street lit up gold at dusk, 40,000 people every single day, each one handing you $100 just for the right to walk in. Do that 350 days a year and the whole thing looks like a printing press with a Ferris wheel bolted to the side. That's the picture. That's what the brochure sells you. Here's what the brochure doesn't show you. At the biggest, most profitable parks on earth, that $100 ticket, the one everybody complains about, the one that feels like a robbery at the turnstile, barely covers the cost of opening the gates that morning. It doesn't build the ride. It doesn't service the debt. It does not make you rich. The money is somewhere else. The money is warm. It's wrapped in a paper sleeve. It costs $9 and it has cinnamon sugar on it. Sounds simple. It is not simple. Because a business that grosses billions of dollars a year can still be killed by a rainy Tuesday, and understanding why is the entire game. Start with the ground, because the ground is the first trap. A theme park is not a building. It's a small city that happens to have roller coasters in it. You need parking for tens of thousands of cars, back of house roads, water treatment, power substations, warehouses, and room to expand, because the day you stop expanding is the day attendance starts sliding. Rule of thumb, the public-facing park is maybe a third of the land you actually have to own. Walt Disney understood this better than anyone, and he learned it the hard way. When Disneyland opened in Anaheim in 1955, he owned about 160 acres and not 1 inch more. Within a year, motels, cheap diners, and souvenir shacks had strangled the perimeter. Every one of those businesses was feeding on the crowd Walt paid to attract, and Walt got nothing. So when he went to Florida in the mid-1960s, he bought through a wall of shell companies with names like the I-4 Corporation and the Latin American Development and Management Corporation, so no seller would know who was assembling the puzzle. He ended up with roughly 27,000 acres of swamp and scrub for about $5 million, around $180 an acre. That land is now worth an amount of money that is genuinely difficult to write down. And that's the first lesson. The park makes the land valuable, so if you don't own the land, you are building someone else's fortune with your own money. Now build the thing. Modern numbers are brutal. A single major steel roller coaster runs $20 to $30 million. A headline dark ride, the kind with animatronics, projection, a physical set your guests will queue 2 hours for, can run north of $100 million on its own. An entire immersive land, like Star Wars, Galaxy's Edge, cost Disney roughly $1 billion per park, and when Universal opened Epic Universe in Orlando in 2025, the reported all-in figure with hotels was around $7 billion. $7 billion before you sell a single ticket, before one guest walks through the gate. So you are now sitting on an asset that cost you billions, that can't be moved, can't be repurposed, and can't be quietly downsized if things go badly. And you have to earn all of it back $12 at a time, which brings us to the revenue. And this is where almost everyone is wrong. Layer 1 is the gate. Admissions. The obvious one. A one-day ticket to the Magic Kingdom runs somewhere between $109 and $190 depending on the day you pick, and everyone assumes that's the business. It isn't. Look at the operators who actually publish their numbers. At the regional chains, the Cedar Points, and Six Flags of the world, admission works out to something like $30-something per guest once you account for season passes, discounts, groups, and comps, because almost nobody pays rack rate. Season pass holders have already paid in one lump an amount that might be less than 2 single-day tickets, and then they visit 8 times. Divide their money across 8 visits, and their ticket is worth a few dollars a day. And here's the reversal. The operator loves that. The operator wants them in. Why would you want a guest who paid you almost nothing to walk through your gate? Because of layer 2, in-park spending, what the industry calls per capita or per cap, and it is the number every executive in this business actually watches. Once a guest is inside, they're capped. They cannot leave for lunch. That's why re-entry is discouraged and why there's nothing to eat within a mile of the gate. They're hot, they're walking 12,000 steps, they have children who are melting down, and every 150 feet there is a cart selling relief. A soft pretzel, a frozen lemonade, a $9 churro that cost you all in with labor and the paper sleeve well under $1. At the regional parks, in-park per cap spending runs around $60 a head. Food, drinks, merchandise, games, parking, lockers, the cabana you rented by the wave pool. That is roughly double what they paid to get in. At the destination parks, the per cap figure is far higher because the guest is on vacation, which is a psychological state in which normal price resistance simply stops working. Nobody flies 2,000 miles, takes a week off work, and then refuses to buy the light-up sword because it's $40. They already sank the vacation. $40 is a rounding error inside a $5,000 trip. Read that again, because it's the whole model. The ticket is not the product. The ticket is the cover charge that gets a spending machine through the door. That's why parks gave away season passes at absurd prices for years. They weren't selling admission. They were buying footfall, and footfall converts into food, merch, and parking at margins retail can only dream about. Food and beverage run 60 to 70% gross margin. Merchandise on branded product you designed and manufactured yourself can run higher. Parking is close to pure profit. You already own the asphalt, and if you ever forget that, if you start believing the ticket really is the product, the market will correct you immediately. In 2022, Six Flags tried exactly that. New management decided the parks were too crowded with cheap pass holders, so they raised prices hard, cut the discounts, and went hunting for a wealthier guest who'd spend more per head. The theory was elegant: fewer people, better people, higher per cap. What actually happened is that attendance collapsed by roughly a quarter in a single year. Millions of visits gone, and the higher spending from the guests who stayed did not come close to filling the hole. Revenue fell. The stock was cut in half. They spent the next 2 years walking it back, because the churro economy only works if there are bodies to sell churros to. Empty aisles don't buy anything, no matter how rich the people in them are. Layer 3 is the upcharge, and it's the fastest growing line in the business. Skip the line access, Genie Plus, Lightning Lane, Express Pass, Fast Lane. Every park has a version. Sells you the one thing the park is structurally short of: time. $15 to $40 a head, on top of the ticket, on top of the food. And it costs the park essentially nothing to produce, because the queue already exists. You are simply selling permission to skip other people. It's the highest margin product in the park, and it is invisible in every photo of the castle. And then there's layer 4, the one that separates the parks that print money from the parks that merely survive. The hotel. A day guest is worth 1 per cap. A guest sleeping in your hotel on your property is worth 3, 4, or 5 days of per cap, plus the room rate, plus breakfast, plus the fact that they can't easily go anywhere else. This is why Disney has tens of thousands of hotel rooms in Orlando, and why Universal spent years building an entire ladder of hotels from value to luxury before they built their newest park. Universal didn't need more roller coasters. Universal needed nights, because the moment a family sleeps on your property, the vacation stops being a day trip and becomes a captive week, and the numbers reflect it. At a company like Disney, the park segment's revenue is split roughly a third admissions, roughly a third food and merchandise, and about a quarter resorts and vacations. Admissions are barely a third of a business everyone thinks is entirely admissions, so that's the top line. Now let's talk about where it leaks. Labor is the monster. Walt Disney World employs something like 77,000 people on one site, the largest single-site employer in the United States. Ride operators, cooks, custodians, lifeguards, entertainers, engineers. And here's the trap: you need almost all of them whether or not the guests show up. A ride has a legally required number of operators to run it all, whether it's carrying 24 people or 2, then maintenance, which never stops. Every coaster gets torn down, x-rayed, and rebuilt on a schedule. Every animatronic drifts out of tolerance. Every inch of paint is being attacked by weather and hands. Big operators plow something like 9 or 10% of revenue back into capital expenditure every year, hundreds of millions of dollars. And much of that isn't even a new ride. It's just keeping what you have from decaying, and you still have to build the new ride. Because in this business, the question every family asks is, what's new this year? If the answer is nothing, they go somewhere else. You are on a treadmill that costs $100 million a lap. Then insurance and liability in a business where you strap children into a machine and accelerate them to 70 miles an hour. Then utilities, because you're running a city. Then marketing, because a park nobody's thinking about is a park nobody's driving to. Then property tax on land you deliberately made priceless. Add it up and you land on the ugliest fact in the industry: your costs are almost entirely fixed and your revenue is entirely not. Here's what that means: the park costs roughly the same to open on a sold-out Saturday in July as it does on a wet Tuesday in October. Same staff, same power, same insurance, same debt payment. But the churro buying, sword buying, lightning lane buying crowd is gone, and there's a second second, crueler version of that same problem. A theme park sells the most perishable product on Earth, capacity. An empty seat on a roller coaster at 2 p.m. is not inventory you can sell tomorrow. It's gone forever, the instant the train leaves the station. A store with unsold shirts still owns shirts. You own nothing. You owned a moment and it expired. That is why weather can gut a quarter, why a heat wave or a hurricane season or a gas price spike shows up directly on the bottom line, and why the whole business runs on a knife's edge between a park that is comfortably full and a park that is quietly bleeding. Want to see how fast that knife cuts? Go to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina in 2008. Hard Rock Park opened in April of that year. It cost around $400 million. It was serious, real coasters, a Led Zeppelin ride, a Moody Blues attraction, licensed music everywhere, professionally designed and genuinely well reviewed by people who went. It was not a scam. It was not a cheap park. It was a legitimate, expensively built theme park. It filed for bankruptcy in September. 5 months, 1 season. What killed it wasn't the rides. It was the arithmetic underneath. Attendance came in at a fraction of projections, around 30% of what the plan needed. Gas prices spiked that summer, and Hard Rock Park's guests were drive-in guests. The financial crisis was landing on exactly the middle-class families who were supposed to fill it. The park had no on-site hotels, so it captured no nights. Every guest was a single-day trip per cap, and then they went home. And it was targeted at adults who loved classic rock, in a market that runs on families with children. But the fatal part is what we just walked through. $400 million of debt does not care that it rained, or that gas hit $4, or that the crowd never came. The interest payment arrives on schedule. The fixed costs arrive on schedule. The revenue does not. The assets were later sold for around $25 million, roughly 6 cents on the dollar. Someone else reopened it under a new name. That failed too. $400 million of steel and concrete sitting in the sun, still costing money, earning nothing. So how does the modern operator survive? By admitting what the business really is and running it that way. First, they stopped selling admission and started selling access. Ticket prices are now dynamic, priced by the day like an airline seat, cheap in September, brutal in December. Because the goal isn't a full park, it's a profitable one. Second, they hunt per cap relentlessly. Mobile ordering so you don't skip lunch because the line was long, the resort charge band on your wrist that turns spending into a gesture instead of a decision, exclusive merchandise you can only buy inside. Third, they've turned the calendar into a product. Halloween nights, holiday overlays, food and wine festivals. Separately ticketed events that fill the dead weeks with new revenue and cost almost nothing but decorations and overtime. And fourth, the arms race that dwarfs all of it. Intellectual property. You aren't competing on how tall your coaster is anymore. You're competing on whether a 5-year-old already loves the character standing at the front of it. That's why the great parks are now attached to studios, and why a park without IP has to buy it at a price that will make your eyes water. Which brings us back to the Churro. You will never own the ride that pays you back. The ride is bait. $100 million of steel and story whose only job is to move a family through the gate and hold them there for 11 hours, tired and hungry and delighted, walking past cart after cart. The park doesn't sell thrills. It sells a captive afternoon, and then it monetizes every minute of it. So look at your park again and see it for what it is. It looks like a business built on wonder. It's actually a business built on foot traffic and hunger. The castle is the marketing. The coaster is the marketing. The fireworks are the marketing. The $9 churro is the business.